In this podcast episode, experts Andrew Bustamante, Annie Jacobson, and Benjamin Rad engage in a wide-ranging discussion on the recent U.S. strike that decapitated Iranian leadership, exploring the historical context, intelligence dynamics, geopolitical ramifications, and the implications for global security, including the heightened risks of nuclear conflict. They examine the motivations behind the strike, the current state of Iran and its regional interactions, and the evolving nature of international power, surveillance, and military technology. The conversation begins by tracing the complex history between the United States and Iran, starting with the era of the Shah, a monarch allied closely with the West, whose modernization efforts clashed with traditional and religious segments of Iranian society. This tension culminated in the 1979 revolution led by Ayatollah Khomeini, whose rise was fueled by popular backlash against what was seen as a puppet regime controlled by the U.S. and its Western allies, particularly Britain. The U.S. involvement in Iran deepened during events like the 1953 overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh, an episode in which the CIA played a supporting role alongside British intelligence to reinstate the Shah's power after Mossadegh's move to nationalize Iranian oil suppressed Western interests. This long history of meddling bred resentment and enmity, framing Iran as a rogue nation, independent from international norms and hostile toward American influence. Decades of conflict and opposition shaped Iran's Revolutionary Guard and proxy networks, which continue to affect regional dynamics. The post-1979 Iranian regime consolidated power, intertwining religious ideology and state governance, which set the stage for ongoing hostility toward the West, famously embodied in slogans like "Death to America." A central question tackled is why the U.S., under the Trump administration, chose to carry out a decapitation strike against Iran's leadership at this particular moment. The panel agrees that official narratives, such as stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program, are contradicted by intelligence reports, specifically the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, which indicate that Iran was not actively pursuing nuclear weapons, but rather focusing on biological and chemical weapons research. Satellite evidence showed rebuilding efforts at nuclear sites despite previous strikes, but the consensus was that the nuclear threat was overstated publicly. Instead, the strike is framed as driven by internal political calculations, personal legacy ambitions of the president, attempts to regain international influence, and pressures linked to regional allies such as Israel and Arab states. The timing coincided with perceived vulnerability of the Iranian regime following mass domestic protests and proxy setbacks post-October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. Additionally, coordinated intelligence involving Israeli and possibly British contributions played a vital role in enabling the strike. Some experts view this as a demonstration of power driven more by a desire for a win amid political challenges at home, rather than by strictly defensible security concerns. The discussion highlights the complexity and opacity of modern intelligence gathering, emphasizing that the CIA no longer operates as the sole or even primary source of intelligence in many cases. Instead, much intelligence is derived from foreign partners, with Israel being the most knowledgeable country regarding Iran's internal operations. The close collaboration between U.S. staff and Israeli intelligence allowed the identification and targeting of key Iranian leadership figures, reflecting the influence allies exert on U.S. foreign policy decisions. However, the panel also notes the limitations and challenges within intelligence agencies, including attrition, politicization, and the loss of capabilities. The accuracy of threat assessments remains uncertain, as exemplified by past miscalculations like Iraq's weapons of mass destruction claims and the unforeseen nature of events such as 9/11. This undermines public trust and complicates policymaking in volatile regions. The immediate aftermath of the strike has dramatically escalated tensions across the Middle East. Iran retaliated by launching missile and drone attacks on neighboring countries hosting U.S. forces, such as the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. This regional escalation increases risks to global trade and energy markets, undermines stability, and exacerbates the precarious balance maintained through decades of regional diplomacy. The attack has disrupted the fragile cooperation among Gulf states, some of which had maintained pragmatic relations with Iran despite deep political and sectarian divides. The burden-sharing strategy of the U.S. military doctrine is evident, as Iran's campaigns appear designed to pressure both the U.S. and its regional allies, expanding the conflict transnationally. The damage to tourism and investment in Gulf cities like Dubai will have economic repercussions, potentially destabilizing these relatively prosperous and secure states. The experts debate the heightened risk of nuclear conflict triggered by the strike, acknowledging that while Iran is not confirmed to have a deployed nuclear weapon, tensions surrounding its enrichment activities and illicit breaches of the Non-Proliferation Treaty amplify fears. The panel points out that this strike coincides with increased nuclear posturing in other parts of the world, including France's deployment of tactical nuclear weapons across Europe and the ongoing war in Ukraine involving Russia's nuclear threats. They caution that nuclear escalation risk is multifaceted, stemming not only from Iran but also from broader geopolitical conflicts involving nuclear-armed powers such as Russia and North Korea. Military doctrines emphasizing burden sharing and proxy involvement mean that conflicts can be prolonged, with irregular warfare and low-intensity engagements, inflicting continuous harm globally. An emerging and deeply concerning theme is the rise of artificial intelligence and advanced surveillance technology in modern warfare and intelligence. The episode highlights tensions between defense agencies and AI companies like Anthropic, which signed contracts with the Pentagon but resisted applications for autonomous weapons and mass domestic surveillance. The use of AI tools in recent covert operations exemplifies the integration of technology in lethal military decisions, raising ethical and strategic questions. There is also commentary on how global powers are racing to develop and deploy AI capabilities, with China aggressively advancing its programs. This race exacerbates the geopolitical competition and potentially destabilizes international security further. The expansion of surveillance infrastructure, both globally and within the U.S., is viewed as a double-edged sword that can curtail personal liberties under the guise of security, a trend that could accelerate amidst heightened threats and domestic unrest. Discussion turns to U.S. domestic instability and leadership. The panel suggests the Trump administration's approach to foreign policy is highly personalized, driven more by individual legacy than collective governance or traditional doctrine. This personalization of power contributes to erratic decision-making and erosion of institutional norms. They also explore the challenges a post-Trump successor might face, emphasizing the difference between strong leaders and strong men, with fears that authoritarian approaches may become the default mode in global politics. The political polarization and tribalism within the United States compound these international challenges. Increased surveillance, social media manipulation, and disinformation campaigns deepen societal fractures, with foreign influence operations adding layers of complexity to public discourse. The necessity for voters to engage thoughtfully in democratic processes is stressed as a means to reclaim agency and check executive power. A critical obstacle for understanding the situation is the black box nature of Iran's information environment, coupled with the pervasive prevalence of misinformation and influence operations on social media. The guests recount experiences of manipulated social media environments, bot-driven messaging campaigns targeting public figures, and the echo chambers that reinforce partisan views. This makes discerning reality difficult for both the general public and policymakers, complicating the prospects for measured responses. They urge listeners to seek broad, diverse sources and be open to challenging one's own beliefs, highlighting the importance of empathy and intellectual humility in navigating this information landscape. The episode advocates for conversations that embrace cognitive dissonance as a pathway to deeper understanding. Looking ahead, the experts see the kinetic war phase with Iran lasting weeks, but expect that broader proxy conflicts and tensions will persist for years. The Iranian regime's capacity for a protracted war of attrition through regional allies like Hezbollah and Hamas is seen as a serious concern that may pose ongoing security challenges. Questions remain regarding potential regime change internal fractures within Iran's power structures, and the potential for foreign adversaries such as China and Russia to capitalize on the chaos. The risk of global escalations, both conventional and nuclear, loom large as authoritarian actors test limits and norms erode. Emphasis is placed on the implications for global supply chains, particularly semiconductor manufacturing, centered on Taiwan, which faces threats of blockade or invasion by China. This dependency represents a strategic vulnerability for the West in the emerging multipolar world. Concluding the discussion, the panel offers guidance to individuals navigating uncertain geopolitical times. They stress the importance of exercising democratic rights, particularly voting, as a primary avenue of influence. Recognizing the interconnectedness of global events and local impacts, they encourage cultivating curiosity, empathy, and open-mindedness while remaining skeptical of singular narratives. Some express personal decisions to relocate in search of greater stability, underscoring concerns about the direction of democratic governance and social cohesion domestically. Ultimately, the message is one of cautious awareness, balanced with proactive engagement to shape a future that resists authoritarian impulses.